The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. We have to do the works of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and smeared the clay on his eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back able to see. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is," but others said, "No, he just looks like him." He said, "I am." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He replied, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And so I went there and washed and was able to see." And they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought the one who was once blind to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes on a Sabbath. So then the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see. He said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I can see." So some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him, since he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight, until they summoned the parents of the one who had gained his sight. They asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" His parents answered and said, "We know this is our son, and that he was born blind. We do not know how he sees now, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age, he can speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged him as the Christ, he would be expelled from the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, "He is of age, question him." So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." He replied, "If he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was blind, and now I see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" They ridiculed him and said, "You are that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this one is from." The man answered and said to them, "That is what is so amazing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, he listens to him. It is unheard of that anyone ever opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything." They answered and said to him, "You were born totally in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshipped him. Then Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not also blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying, 'We see,' so your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord. In the Gospel reading today, we hear three different responses to Jesus and the results of those responses. The first is the blind man. He was blind from birth. He knows that he's blind because he's sitting there begging. He knows that he's helpless and that he desires to be healed. He desires to see. This man represents all of us. All of us are born blind spiritually because of original sin, because of our fallen human nature. There's a veil over our eyes. We don't see 20/20 spiritually. There's an impairment of our spiritual vision. It's hard for us to understand the things of God, to know Him, to recognize Him, and to believe in Him. So it's good for us to start off being humble, like this blind man. He is humble, he is helpless. He knows he knows that he needs help. And that's important for us too. If we want to start seeing spiritually and growing in faith and learning from God and about supernatural things, it's good for us to acknowledge that we are spiritually blind and we need to be healed. That disposition is so important if we want to advance, if we want to grow. And so he does. This blind man is able to see because, first of all, what does he do? He listens to Jesus. He does what he tells him. Jesus tells him, after he smeared clay on his eyes, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. The man didn't ignore that request, didn't ignore that command. He did exactly as Jesus told him. And of course, good things come about when we do what Jesus tells us. That's what our Blessed Mother tells us too. Those were her very last words in the Bible. Speaking to her children, to us, she tells us, do whatever he tells you. You can't go wrong. When we do what Jesus tells us, good things happen, just like this blind man. And so he obeys, and he's healed. And now he's interrogated by the Pharisees because this happened on the Sabbath. And so some of the Pharisees automatically say, Jesus, is a sinner because he did this on the Sabbath. He's not from God. But there was another group of Pharisees that said, wait a minute, how can a sinner do such miracles? How can a sinner do such signs? So there was a division among them initially, right? But as the story unfolds, they interrogate him some more. They interrogate his parents too, to prove that that there was no miracle, right? That he wasn't blind from birth. They asked his parents 3 questions. Is this your son? Was he born blind? And how does he see now? And the parents answered 2 of the 3 questions. They avoid the 3rd one on purpose, out of fear of the Jews. So they said, yes, this is our son, and yes, he was born blind. But who healed him and how he sees now, we do not know. And St. John in the Gospel says specifically, they said that because they were afraid of the Jews. Because the Jews had said, if anybody acknowledged that Jesus is the Christ, they're going to be thrown out of the synagogue. They can no longer worship. They can no longer be part of the community. And so the parents were afraid. They didn't want to be expelled. They didn't want to be rejected, right? And so they put it on their son. Ask him. He is of age. He can answer for himself. So those are the 3 responses. And we see this blind man growing in knowledge of Jesus, right? First, when they asked him, who healed you? He said, a man called Jesus, referring to Jesus, a man called Jesus. And as the story develops, they ask him, what do you have to say for him? Because he healed you. And then he said, he is a prophet. So you see how he's growing in his knowledge of Jesus. And at the end, what does he say about Jesus? Who is he, the Son of Man, sir, that I may worship him? And Jesus said, I am he, the one that you sing, the one that you're speaking to. And what does he call him at that point? I do believe, Lord. And he worshiped. So you see how the blind man, because of his openness, because of his humility, he grew in faith. He grew in insight and spiritual vision. And he was bold and courageous, too, in debating the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were known for their knowledge of the law, for their piety. So people did not dare to debate with them, question them. They usually just accepted and what they said and backed down. But this blind man had the courage to speak up, to debate them. And so with that courage, he bore witness to Christ, and he grew in his understanding of Jesus, and he grew in his faith. The Pharisees, on the other hand, started out with this division among them. Some of them said that Jesus is a sinner. He can't be coming from God. Others said that how can he be a sinner if he performs such a miracle, such a sign? But later on, that group that was open to Jesus and open to his powers kind of went away, didn't they? We don't hear from them anymore. They kind of disappeared. That's because the other group was maybe so powerful, right? That they didn't accept any deviation from their belief. They didn't accept different opinions. Anybody who went against them, they rejected, they silenced. And so they became more hardened. Their hearts became more hardened. In the beginning, they weren't sure about Jesus. They started to question him. But later on, they said, we know that he's a sinner, right? They've made up their mind about Jesus. They weren't open to anything else. They weren't open to the truth. They've hardened their hearts, saying, he is a sinner. He has to be a sinner. He can't come from God. And that's what we see in our world today, don't we? We see so many people who've made up their mind about Jesus, who've hardened their hearts, who will not accept him, who will not believe him, who will reject him. And that's the majority of our people, the people in our world today, right? They've hardened their hearts to Jesus, and they've got more blind. Maybe at some point they were open to Jesus and what he had to say and what he had to teach. But they become more blind, become more in the darkness, and they reject Jesus. And the third group, the third response is from the parents. The parents are the people who straddle the fence. They believe in Jesus, but they don't want to stand up to the bullies. They don't want to stand up to the majority who say that they're going to suffer consequences if they believe in Jesus. So discipleship has a cost. It has a cost. And the parents were not willing to pay for that cost. They were not willing to be rejected and expelled, right? So they straddled the fence because of fear of the Jews, because of self-interest. And do we have that group? Do we have that same response today in our world? Yes, we do. So many people, so many Catholics and Christians are afraid to speak up out of fear of being rejected by others, to be ridiculed, and so on. I hear that all the time. People coming to me, they tell me that they can't speak up at their work. They can't talk about their beliefs because they will be made fun of. They would be rejected, and they don't want that. And so there are three responses and three results. Either we follow the blind man and be courageous and be humble and be open and to stand up for Jesus. We will grow in our faith. We will grow in our knowledge of him and our relationship with him, regardless of the consequences, right? He was expelled. He was thrown out, but he didn't care. He spoke the truth. And Jesus sought him out, and he grew in his faith of Jesus. The Pharisees, on the other hand, went from potential light, potential knowledge of the truth about Jesus, to darkness, to this hardness of heart. And then we have people in the middle who don't really go anywhere because of fear of persecution. So where are you? Maybe you've been in one group. Maybe you've had one response at one point in your life. Maybe you are at a different spot now, right? So we can actually go back and forth. Maybe we've been faithful to Jesus at some point. Maybe now we're afraid to speak out. And maybe some people have fallen away, fell away at some point, and were against the church, and was embarrassed to say that they were Catholic, and to be embarrassed to say what they believe, right? So we see all three responses, back then and today. So which response is most pleasing to God? The one of the blind man, right? It takes courage, it takes humility, and it takes faith. So let us pray that we would be like that blind man, not be like the Pharisees. Don't be prideful. Don't think we know it all, and don't harden our hearts like the world. But be like the blind man. Be humble, to know that we need healing, to know that we need insight, to know that we need enlightenment, so that we may come to know Jesus and bear witness to Christ in the world.